Amalia Hoffman is on a wonderful, inspiring, and passionate journey, doing what she wants to do and wanting to do more and more and more. Today, she shares with us her story as a person who is passionate about her life's work as a children's author, illustrator, and storyteller. Welcome, Amalia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background, because that's very interesting, and I think everybody will want to know so much more about you. Tell me about when you grew up, where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Jerusalem, and at the time that I grew up, Jerusalem was a tiny little city, and we had very few stores. So we grew up in an environment where we really had to create our own stuff, and we had no TV, so we had to entertain ourselves. And we shared a very small apartment. My sisters and I had a sister who was a year and a half older, and a sister who was a year and a half younger. And we shared this tiny little room.
And you had two parents who were together for how many years?
Oh, my parents were together for 60 years, I think.
I love that.
Wonderful parents. And we shared this tiny little room, but we never felt poor.
You said you had everything.
We had everything because my mother was so nurturing when it came to art. For example, she would make us do puppets by taking a toilet paper roll, which we had plenty of, and some crunch newspaper that we put inside. And then she will take newspaper and she'll shred it. And she'll cook it with a little bit of water and a little bit of flour until it became a paper mache. And we built puppet heads from it. And then she will sew costumes for it. And I painted them. And we actually created a theater.
Wonderful.
And it was our theater. And people would invite us to come over and do shows for kids, for birthday parties.
And at what age was this?
Oh, I would say that we were the ages of maybe 6 and going up to 10, about that age.
Yeah.
And it became a passion. My sister became a professional puppeteer and an actress. And I became a writer because we used to write our own stories. And I actually used to make the props for the theater. My mother sewed all the costumes. So I grew up in this environment where we always had a pot cooking, but not with meat, but with paper mache. And then we had a line, a clothesline, with all the little clothes for the puppets. And there were always bits of fabric and bits of thread all over the floor. And my mother had a sewing machine, you know, with a wheel, and we were always sewing. And we made all sorts of stories. We made stories up, and at night we will be telling the shows, or we will be in a yard talking to our friends and kind of making up stories, which is what kids do.
Right.
And it became, for me, it became a passion because I still remember all these stories.
So beautiful.
And and then we had a holiday called Purim, and on that holiday, kids dress up costumes like they do for Halloween, but not for one day, but for 7 days. So my mother would sew all these costumes, and it was like the talk of Jerusalem. Every day we had on a bit different costume. And so I had this passion for sewing and passion for storytelling. And my father made us a puppet theater. He built it from crate of wood. And that's how I grew up, in that kind of an environment, that even though money was kind of not really, there wasn't much to spend, but we had everything. We really had everything. It was wonderful growing up like that. And I think it left me with some kind of inspiration that you can do so much by just sitting and creating from yourself. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to inspire children to go out there and look into themselves and to say, oh, I have a story too. And maybe I can write it. And maybe I can illustrate it. And maybe I can make part of it into a character that will come alive, like a puppet. And so for every story that I write, I create a puppet for it sometime. And then I tell the story, but my characters come out of the story and they become almost live. I like to study them.
I just want to ask you one more question. When did you come over from Jerusalem to the U.S.?
Well, I came here in 1969.
Okay.
Yeah, I came here and I went to Pratt Institute.
That's what I wanted to know,
And I studied
your
in Pratt
education.
Institute. And then I went on and I got my bachelor degree in art from Pratt Institute. And that was wonderful, the experience of coming to an American school and being around people that was so different than me, and each one had a different artistic idea. That was because I went to art school in Israel before that. And then I went to NYU and got a degree, a master's degree in art and art education. And I keep on going back and forth to my
Your country?
education, in a sense that I always rely on what I learned there, but over the years I came up with my own way of creating my art.
Right.
But I think my basics in drawing and in printmaking is from the years that I went to Pratt Institute and NYU.
Okay, good. Well, I don't want to take so much more time up, even though you're fascinating. We have these other things to get to. What do you want to do first?
Well, I'd like to talk about my books because
Okay.
what I do is I write and I illustrate in most cases. And this is a story that I just wrote. And the story is pretty much about magic. So when I tell my story...
It's all children that you
Yeah, all the
focus on.
stories
Okay.
that I write are for children, but some are for older children and some are for younger children. This story is a board book, so it's for very, very young children.
A board book is the
A board
border.
book is a book that has a hard cover.
I remember
and the
those.
pages are hard, so little children can look at it, but they don't tear the pages. And also, usually a little smaller in format, and it's usually a square because it's easier for a child to hold it in a
Right.
hand. So this story is called Astropy, and it's all about imagination. Well, it's about a pea, but what it's
Astropy,
really
okay.
about is imagination. So when I tell my story, I wear my imagination hat. And
What
I
else would you wear?
I wear my imagination hat, and I also have my magic cape, which I put over my shoulders, like this. And this way, I feel like I'm more within the story. I'm now like part of,
Yes,
of the
I would say you
story.
are.
And the story is about a little guy, Pete the pea. He's just a pea that lives in a pea pod. But what pea has, he has a lot of imagination. So I created him in a puppet, and here is Pete, and he lives with all his brothers and sisters. But Pete gets very impatient. So one day, Pete jumps out of his pod. He jumps out of his pod, and you can see it in the book. He jumps out of his pod, and he finds, well, you might think it's a carrot, but for Pete, it's a spaceship. Blast off! Pete is going to space. Blast off! So Pete goes on a journey that is all a vegetable journey, but to him, it's a cosmic adventure. He is in the stars, and you can see that he's now orbiting around the stars, but they're really cauliflower and tomatoes and different vegetables. But then Pete sees a satellite. Ooh, what's going to happen to Pete? Oh, wow. Crash. The satellite, which is really an artichoke, crashes Pete, and he doesn't know what to do. He has no more spaceship. However, in a distance, Pete sees the control shuttle. Here it is. Here is the
Happens to
control
be in that
shuttle.
bag.
Yeah, here is the control shuttle, you see? And they go,
And you do all this, what, at the library? Or
yeah,
at the
I do it in
bookstore when you-
libraries, I do it in schools, I do it in bookstores.
Now, you wrote the book and you illustrated it.
I wrote the book and I
And
illustrated
you
it.
perform.
And I perform it.
Okay.
So when I perform it, I tell the story. So the police came and they rescued Pete. You can see.
And you
they
created
brought him to
all
the
these, the
Yeah, I
costumes,
created all
okay.
this because this, for me, right now, Pete is not just a character in my book. Pete is now a real little
Yes.
person.
Almost-
He's a
he's a
really
person.
little person. He has a lot of imagination. So Pete goes on this great, great journey with the shuttle, but then he gets a telescope. And
Amalia, you're focusing too much on Pete. I think we have to go to Dreidel.
I'm in love with
We
Pete.
have to
Let's
go to-
move on. Let's move on to another character.
I don't want to overdo Pete and minimize Dreidel. All right.
Okay.
Even though I loved Pete and I
Let's
loved that
move
whole
on.
story. Okay. Onward.
Okay. So this is my story, which is called Dreidel Day. And I'll leave my imagination
Pete
hat
the P
on.
up here?
Yeah, I'll leave
Okay.
the P up here. This story is called Dreidel Day, and it's about a cat that plays with a dreidel. It's a book for very young children, and the cat has a journey going from 1 to 8, which are the 8 days of Hanukkah. And on every day, she does something else with her dreidel. So you can count 2, and there are 2 dreidels, and the cat bounces, and then you can count 2, 3, and 4 until you get to 7 and 8. And in every day, the cat does something different with her dreidel. So it's a very, very simple book. And I created the cat. Here she is.
Okay.
This is my cat.
I love this.
And the cat bounces, and she flips,
Children
and she
must go
turns
crazy over this.
and she does all the things that a dreidel does. I also have a dreidel somewhere in there, and I have a costume that I wear. I'm going to put my costume on just
Your
so you
mother
can
and
see.
father must look down
Yeah, they
on
really
you.
inspired me.
But they must look down on you.
This is my costume that I wear. And so
Dreidels
the
all
children
over?
can actually count all the dreidels on the costume. And then the cat has a real dreidel that she can play with.
And those are the dreidels, that's a replica of what you would get at Hanukkah.
Yeah, this is a Hanukkah story because it's about dreidels, but it's really a story about a very playful cat that just has fun. And if she stays all year round, maybe she'll have fun with other things too, not just with a dreidel. She can play with other things too. And the cat has a friend that comes up at the end of the story. So I created the friend too. And here is the friend. Here is her friend. And her friend is a lovely, lovely friend. And you can see.
Adorable.
And she's playing with Hanukkah coins. So that was a lot of fun to make because I got to do the puppets with paper mache the same way we did them when we were kids. And then I sewed the costumes, and I can actually, you can see on the last page that the cat is there too. I'll put that away. Goodbye, cat.
Okay, so what's next?
Okay, so another story that I wrote that has a lot to do with my own childhood is called The Klezmer Bunch. And it's about klezmer music. And klezmer music is a very, very cheerful music that was played mostly in Eastern Europe. It was Jewish music, but it was influenced by Arabic and Gypsy music and German music. And the musicians didn't have a way to carry their instrument, and so they had to usually use very small instruments because they didn't have a car. They traveled mostly by foot. So my main character for the story is Roisele. And Roisele plays the violin. But Roisele is a traveling musician, so she has to travel very, very fast. So she has an apron that she wears, and I made the
This
apron.
is too much. This apron is too much.
And this is her apron.
Adorable.
And in the apron, you can see she has everything that she needs, so she can cook and she can clean the house. And I also like to become Roisele by having a violin. You can see that's my violin. And Roisele wears the same violin in my illustration. And Roisele wears a pot on her head. So kids always ask me, Amalia, why are you wearing a pot on your head? And I say, because Roisele has to travel. And what if she needs to cook chicken soup? She has to have something to cook with.
To keep it.
So she has, and then there is another lovely character in the book, and that is Masha. Masha is a goat And she dances around with Moshe,
Would
who
this be
plays the
Masha?
cymbal. This is Masha, yeah.
How did
so
I know?
Masha is made in the same technique. I started with a toilet paper roll, and then I stuffed it with newspaper.
The good
And
old
then I
toilet
built
paper
her on
rolls
top.
that your mother used,
Yeah,
huh?
the same technique, the same way my mother
think
used
that's
to
a
do
mother
it. It's
thing.
exactly the same way that my mother used to do it.
I think that's amazing.
And here she is, and she dances and she plays the tambourine. If you ask me why I have this old baby carriage, that's because in my story, the musicians pack all their instruments in a baby carriage. I'm going to show you. And so when I tell my story in front of children, I like to bring a baby carriage and show them how all the instruments get stuffed inside it. And
again,
you can see.
You wrote all this? You
Yeah,
illustrated
these
it?
are stories that I
Where
wrote.
did you get this
You can
baby
see
carriage?
the baby
You go-
carriage. Oh, the baby carriage, I found it somewhere in an antique store.
Is it? Yeah,
And
I was gonna ask that.
it's a replica of a real baby
something-
carriage.
it's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And so I like to tell my stories, and when I tell my stories, Rosalie obviously comes alive. She's no more just a character in a story. She is now me, and I am her. And actually, to get to illustrate her, I actually posed for that, and I had my husband take pictures, and you can see that I don't look exactly like her because I changed it, but I was the model for Rosalie. So that's my story, The Klezmer Bunch. And then I have another book, so that's what I wear when I tell that story. And I have another story,
Okay.
which is called Purim Goodies. And that has a lot to do with my childhood too, because my mother, as I mentioned before, my mother used to sew all the customs for Purim. Purim is a holiday that was celebrated in Israel, still is. It's celebrated all over, but in Israel it's more of a big celebration where children wear customs for 7 days. And so at the end of the book, my mother used to sew all the customs. And at the end of the book, I actually
Can I have a close-up on that photo of her
I actually
family?
put a picture
It's an amazing photo.
of my family. You can see I'm the one in the center. I'm the little one in the center because I was the middle child, and I'm dressed as Queen Esther. My younger sister is dressed as a girl from China. And my mother did all the research about the costume and the fan. And my other sister is dressed as a girl from the Caribbean islands. So in the story, which is it's actually a retell of a story by Shalom Aleichem, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof. And in the story, there are 2 girls, and they're really servant girls. And they are supposed to deliver goodies, because on Purim, the parents send gifts for other people. And so they're supposed to deliver goodies for another family, but what happens in the story is they get tempted along the way, and they start eating all the goodies themselves. I wear a little bit of a hat that looks a little bit like what the girls wear when they cook. So here is my custom for Purim goodies, and I have an apron with pictures of girls as they are in the book. And the story is about the girls, but it's also about temptation and what you do when you made a mistake and you took something. In this case, you ate something that really belonged to someone else. And so you can see that here are the 2 houses where the girls are sent from, and here they are, and they get tempted, and they eat all the good stuff that they were supposed to deliver to other family. What I did is I did a lot of research, kind of finding out what foods did people eat in Eastern Europe, what food did they send as gifts for holiday. So when I tell my story, when I go to a school or a bookstore or a library, I actually have all the foods. And I kind of lift it and show the children, here is a Hamantaschen. Here is a Hamantaschen. I go, delicious. Very good. And the kids really enjoy that. And then I have the other tray. And
Okay,
I
but
tell the
I
story
want to
this
get
way.
to your 3D.
Yeah. And so I'm going to put this
Okay.
away. And
Great.
I can talk the whole day. That's my
I
problem.
know. You're talking to the right person.
I
Me
like
too.
this height. How does this look?
Cute. Very cute. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the other.
Yeah. So I also like to create art which might not ever become a book, just for the sake of creating art. And sometimes I just like to start my day by taking my magic marker, which actually looks like a magic marker to me, and just doodling and drawing. And so what I like to do is I like to experiment with different techniques. In this piece, I worked on a board that has plaster on it, and you can see part of the images I actually cut out and brought in. And the story, it's not a story, but it's a little bit of a fantasy of what happens when a boy and a girl flew in the air and entered the magic book. And then the book told them all sorts of amazing stories. I like to experiment with mixed media. What's called mixed media, where you are working with one technique and then switching to a different technique. So that's what I did here. I like to tear the paper rather than keeping it straight. I like the very torn edge because it makes it look more interesting. This piece is what I call a theatrical tableau. And a theatrical tableau is when you build a story, almost like theater, by creating dimensions and creating props. And I was dreaming about something that I saw one day when I was on a trip to Egypt. There is a synagogue in Egypt where they found all these old manuscripts from medieval time, hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts. They were all hidden in the attic of a synagogue in Egypt. And so I visited that synagogue. And I said to myself, what happens if I was a little girl and I lived in Cairo? And one day I entered that synagogue and found all these amazing manuscript and letters and stories. What would it be like? And so I created this fantasy of a boy and a girl that are going into that place. And what I did here is I actually have a book inside. So the book becomes a storyteller as part of it. So I created that book and I wanted it to look old. So if you look at it, the pages there look as if they are burnt a little bit. That's what I did. In the one far to the right, I experimented in a different technique, which is called nu pastel. I actually worked on a black surface, which is a sandpaper surface. And then I worked with nu pastel, so you get all these wonderful...
Pastels.
Yeah, they're pastels, but they're not, they're almost like pencils. I can control them a little better, and I can sharpen them. But what it allows me to create is all these beautiful textures and nuances of color, which I couldn't get with just like a watercolor or magic marker or even a pencil. And I love that kind of feeling, that it has this rough feeling that I really enjoy. The piece down there on the bottom, the colorful piece, is it's really a three-dimensional piece that started looking a little bit like this. In other words, I had a surface, and then I cut up all the fish and the houses and the girl and the waves, and then I assemble it into a theatrical tableau. But what I also like to do is I like to have it photographed later on, because when I photograph, it becomes flat, but it still looks like pop art. And I use that for, if you look for, creating that feeling. The way I created those houses is by using paint, but also some toothbrush. I like to use toothbrush because it gives me all these little dots, and I can dot and dot and dot, but when you use a toothbrush, it's more, it happens, what happens, happens. You don't have much control. And so it's kind of nice. I look at it and I say, wow, that's cool, you know, and I can add a little more, I can put a little off. I really enjoy that technique. And sometimes I like to just have fun with different type of art, like creating jewelry.
Now you created that?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
I create jewelry.
Very beautiful.
And I actually drew the piece in there and assembled it in inside plexiglass with rhinestone. And jewelry is a wonderful way to create art because then you can also wear
Yes.
it.
Are those earrings? Did you do those too?
No, I didn't do the earring. I can't claim the earrings.
Okay.
I
You know what, though?
I
Why
can't
don't you
claim the earring.
do the
but,
bottle? Yeah.
But I also like to work in completely unconventional way where I don't work on paper at all. And I don't work on any particular surface, but I work inside. Like this piece is inside a bottle, obviously, and it's the Venus of Botticelli swimming in a sea. And if you ask me how I got the Venus into the bottle, well, I can tell you that I had little Venus seeds and I grew them in a bottle, but you're not going to believe that. Okay, what I actually did is I had somebody cut the bottom.
Oh, isn't
and then
that
I put it
interesting?
on the bottom. But you know, for those of you,
Because I was like, does it fold and then unfold when it hits the
no,
water?
no. I had different ways of doing it. It wasn't easy. Paper is very forgiving. It can, you know, so a little bit of it. What I did is I wet the paper, and then I let it dry. I actually used a hair dryer. After I wet the paper, I cut it and drew, and then I wet the paper, and then I let it dry. So it came back to the same thing.
I'm thinking that you've really evolved from your first painting that you showed your mother.
Yeah. Well, my first painting it was just black. It was just black. The whole thing, from left to right, from right to left, the whole thing was a smear of black.
Right.
And
how old were you?
Oh, maybe I was 4, something like that, even younger. And my mother said, "Well, Amalia, that's beautiful. What is it?" And I said, "It's a chicken." It's a chicken coop. And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, where are the chickens?" And I said, "Well, they're asleep and it's dark. You can't see them."
That's
and
perfect,
it made a lot of sense to me that if it's a chicken soup, chicken coop, not chicken soup.
We like that too. We like chicken soup.
Chicken coop. And it's night. You're not going to see the chicken, so it makes sense that the whole thing will be black.
Right. And she was nurturing you, and she was humoring you.
The whole thing was just black from the beginning to the end. I wish I still had it, because that's something I would have liked to frame.
You've evolved from that.
Yeah. So,
but that's a wonderful story.
Yeah, it was a really good story. And if we have time, I have one more book.
Well, quickly, because we're almost running out of time, unfortunately.
So this book is called Friday Night with the Pope, and I didn't write it. However, I illustrated it. And it's a very emotional story about a boy who met John Paul II and had a Friday night dinner with him. It's an interfaith book between a boy who was Jewish and the Pope, who was the first Pope who actually went to Israel. And I was honored to illustrate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's time to wrap up.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
I loved it. I know everyone else has too. Amalia Hoffman is truly an inspiration for all of us to enjoy our lives to the fullest, to keep growing, exploring, and creating as we move along on our life's journey. Thank you again for tuning into Lisa.